afternoon and welcome to our first Critical Conversations panel. We are thrilled for the guests that are joining us today. And let's start off with some introductions. So first up, we have a superintendent of Fallbrook Union Elementary School District. She's been there since 2011. She helped launch AASA's Women Aspiring Superintendent Academy last year. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Candace Singh.
Hi, everybody. Really great to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. All right. Our second guest is the current superintendent of East High School, an experienced school leader and frequent speaker on topics related to cultural competence, differentiation, and administrative leadership, Dr. Shaun Nelms.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right, we now have Daniel de los Reyes, the principal of Darwin Elementary in Chicago Public Schools. He believes in leading with his feet rather than leading from his seat, and he's passionate about being present, recognizing potential, and being the most influential teacher in the building. Welcome, Danny.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be a part of this panel.
All right, thanks, Danny. Our next guest is the principal of A.B. Combs Leadership Magnet. She's been an educator for 38 years, and in 2014, she received the highest honor any North Carolina educator can receive, the coveted Friday Medal of Honor. Please join me in welcoming Muriel Summers.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
And our last guest is Franklin Covey's education practice leader, New York Times bestselling author, and someone who's devoted to transforming education around the globe by bringing leadership, principles, and skills to as many kids, educators, and schools as possible. Please join me in welcoming Shaun Covey.
Thank you for joining us today.
All right, so we're gonna jump right in. We have some topics that were submitted in from educators all across the globe, some Leader in Me practitioners, some leaders that are not part of Leader in Me, and we just wanna pose these questions to you. So our first topic that we're gonna discuss is the impacts of COVID. So our first question, and this is open to any of you, what's one thing that you've either learned, loved, or grieved during COVID?
I would say that I definitely grieve the absence of our students and staff, our school community. It means so much to us as educators. I'm sure it means a ton to our students as well to not have those daily interactions and shared moments. I will say the greatest thing that I learned is that for many communities, what they're experiencing now, they've experienced for centuries, and they have cried out for help from local communities, agencies, from government, and their voices are finally being acknowledged, and it's being seen as a national pandemic in the same way in which COVID itself is a medical one. So I have learned that it is so important for us to anchor into our communities to ensure that what we seek to do is aligned with their greatest challenges, and that we embody an old African proverb that says there's nothing for us without us, and we have to really involve those individuals so we redefine what we really stands for in our P12 settings.
I couldn't agree with you more. One thing that I have learned, just many things, right, as all of us have. One thing that stands out to me is how much a crisis amplifies effective leadership or ineffective leadership. And of the colleagues like Shaun and Muriel and Danny across the country, and Shaun, it's been very inspiring for me to see really amazing leaders right now amplified to bring just calm, reassurance, clarity, direction, particularly in the education setting. And you can see beautiful examples of leaders who are stepping up and doing everything they can for their kids and for their staff. And I'm really, really inspired by that. Unfortunately, we also see leadership that has been magnified that's ineffective. And we're seeing examples of things that are not good for our communities. So I continue to look toward the leaders that are a part, like the leaders that are part of this panel, for inspiration and the amplification that's happened about what we really need from leadership right now, which is, I mean, we need a lot from our leaders right now, and we're all really striving to do and to be there and to create something meaningful for our kids and something reassuring for the people who work with them. So, and that's really the task we're faced with as we look to go back to school.
I do agree with what Shaun and Candy have said. And I also reflect back on, I think it was Shaun who said recently that the habits are at their best when presented with a challenge. And I honestly do not know how our staff or how I would have gotten through without being able to lean in and fall back on those great foundational principles. You know, right now we are using the language in ways that we have not used it and haven't had to use it, honestly, in the past. We've always carried it around with us, but we have pulled out that toolkit, that leadership toolkit. Everything that Shaun continually teaches us, his father taught us, that we work within our circle of influence rather than our circle of concern. It's just in a meeting with a group of teachers, and I said, okay, let's look at the quadrants. What quadrant are we in right now? We are not in the quadrant of producing great results. We are in a quadrant of waste right now. We cannot control these things. So what I have learned is the power and the just incredible gift that these habits have given us during this time. What I grieve is the human interaction. I grieve missing that. I grieve not having children around me right now. But I know that's only temporary and that we will be back. One thing we've also learned from the habits is the importance of beginning with the end in mind. We're in this place where we are right now, but we won't be here forever. And let's picture where we're going to be 6 months from now, a year from now. So I'm very, very grateful for the power of the habits and the many lessons I have learned regarding leadership, effective leadership.
In regards to grieving, I grieve our children leaving their livelihood, leaving their friends. What is their community, and being torn apart from that? I grieve the interactions, as Muriel stated, with our loved ones and our friends. Not just the face-to-face, but the smile-to-smile. Here in Chicago, we've also grieved the loss of community members, and to the point in which we had to have makeshift memorial services at the initial of the outbreak in our own parking lot from parents, a parent in particular who had passed away. And also dealing with Chicago violence and the loss of a student during the pandemic, which really speaks to what our school and community provides for our youth. But lessons learned are abundant as well. And I would say leading with the abundance mentality that within our community, we do possess the talents and the skills to get through this crisis. And so learning to really hunker down with our strengths, because in our strengths lie our resiliency. And the abundance mentality has been a great guide in really leading our community. And as mentioned before, leadership is crucial at this point. And finally, I've loved the approach that our team has taken and our community has lived within, which has built the capacity of each one of our leaders. And what I mean by that is that it really took a communal effort to lead our prospective responsibilities. And through that process, I've seen leaders emerge like none other. Collaboration and love really being at the forefront of how we serve. And so just speaking of this dynamic time that we've been in has really, really has me thinking of how much we do really live out our habits and how much our habits are important in guiding us forward as we move through the next wave and the next hill of this pandemic.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, everyone. And what I've grieved is, really just having my kids go to school. Just, the learning that comes from school, and my kids have generally loved school. And so that's been, and they missed the whole, spring, and that was really sad. And now we're not quite sure what's going to happen this fall, but that's been hard. I've also grieved COVID-19, means you put on 19 pounds. That's what it felt like after I wasn't moving so much, and I put on weight immediately, but I've been able to lose it again. But on the good side, things that I've loved having more time. I've had so many family dinners, not being in airports. I travel a lot. I have not missed security checkpoints at airports, going through those lines. So I've loved the family thing. I've also, speaking of the habits, the idea of begin with the end in mind has been on my mind. And I'm thinking, you know what, we're going to look back in a few years and talk about, do you remember that pandemic? Or I was part of that. And this is going to pass. We're going to get through this, like we have so many other tough things. Who knows how long it will carry out, but I think just keeping that in mind. And early on, a friend of mine sent me this great little story that really inspired me, and about the idea of kind of think about this of emerging stronger. How can we emerge stronger through this? And it was a true story of Isaac Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. And in 1665, he was a student at Trinity College in Cambridge. He just got his bachelor's degree, and he was going to stay on to get another degree. The pandemic hit, that killed 15% of those in London. He moved out to the country 60 miles away where he lived, and he called it his year of wonders. He was on quarantine. He was there for 1 year, and during that time, he developed calculus. And many of the laws of physics were developed in that, what he called his year of wonders, because he had this free time to think differently and space. Now, I'm not expecting that I'm going to invent calculus or something that great, but it has been a good thing for me to think about, this is going to pass. How can we get stronger? And from Franklin Covey's perspective, what we've done is we've said, we've got to make sure the Leader in Me is such a powerful program. Let's figure out how to make sure that anyone can do it virtually, whether it's live online through Zoom or some other media, or let's make it sure they can do it themselves through their own computers and virtual coaching and so forth. So that's one way we've tried to emerge stronger, is just try to make it accessible as much as we possibly can. But so many good things. There's always silver linings to these dark clouds, for sure.
Thanks, you all. These are all connected to the rest of the topics that we're going to talk about over this hour. One question that came to us is thinking from the perspective of a building leader or a district level leader. What tips would you give to a first year leader who is just starting out as an administrator and is steering the ship of their school during this time?
At our school, we talk often about embracing our incompetence. And as a means towards being able to take risks, to try new things, and to not seek perfection. And so for a new leader, I would say these are unprecedented times. You have to really put first things first, which is ensuring that every student has an equitable learning experience, and every adult in the system is taking care of themselves and taking care of, so they're better able to serve our school communities. And then take the time to focus on the competencies of being a school leader. But COVID has presented a unique opportunity for us to really re-engage in the personal side of this work. And so I would say to them, focus on getting to know people and their true needs, and to not make assumptions. And then you can work on those other competencies later on. But I do wish them all well, and to lean into those who have done this for quite some time. Yeah. They may have a few tricks in their bags, but also they may be able to help those experienced leaders also who are struggling with technology or struggling with different modalities of communication. So again, I wish them well. Education is a wonderful profession. COVID provides some really unique opportunities for us, and to lean into the greater education community to see clarity and understanding. It's a great time. I'm actually excited about it a little bit.
So I don't know if everyone was aware that this was my first year as a principal. So welcome to the principalship. So what I leaned in my first year as a principal was centering myself in my personal mission statement. Who am I as a person, and how do I want to lead? And by that, really harnessing my focus on relationship building and being a servant leader. And so in being a servant leader, clearly identifying our goals as a school and as a community, and keeping them simple within one or two goals that we had. And so our goals were, number one, building relationships, fortifying ourselves in communal experiences, and growing in support of one another. And our second goal was ensuring that at-home remote learning could be as quality filled and enriching as an experience as they would have in school. And so just leading every meeting, leading every interaction by setting the end in mind with clear goals. And then again, being a servant leader and helping to support and ensure that everyone was going to live that out. And so really harnessing who I am, what my strengths were, which is community building, relationship building, leading with that, garnished a great response that strengthened and fortified me in my own beliefs. And then setting up clear goals that were tangible, that made sense to our paradigms and our core values, that only reiterated and fortified all of that we had learned prior to this experience. And so through harnessing who I was as a leader prior to stepping into this role, really focusing on clear goals and living that out, really set us up for success and garnishing great response from our community and staff and students alike.
Danny, that's awesome. Oh my gosh. As a starting your second year as a principal, that's fantastic. You know what I would say is one of the things that I've been a superintendent for 10 years. And one of the things that I have really worked on over that period of time in this role is my own self-awareness. And when I think back to when I was a first year principal, there is so much coming at you when you're a principal. But right now we have complex information, very contradictory views about how we should be doing things, and incredibly strong emotions on the parts of our communities, our staff, our teachers, our parents. This is a very intense time to be a leader of a school or a school district. And so one of the things I would encourage new principals to do is to think about that personal awareness, that reflective thinking, and that our opportunity to bring calm and reassurance to the people that we're leading, I think is a really important role that we're playing right now. There are so many intense emotions that are coming at us from opening school or don't open school to, from what is happening, whether it's in your state perspective or your state legislature or government, and what we're all being asked to do as school leaders right now. And sometimes I think the most important thing we can do for our folks that we're leading is to bring a sense of calm when it doesn't feel calm anywhere else. I think that can come from being very well informed, being not just listening to the news, right? But really reaching out and understanding what are the facts and the implications of what's going on in your community and in your school district. When people are looking to us for answers, I think it's important for us to be spending the time to be very, very well informed of what the facts are and what's actually happening in our communities. But then I think that on top of that is we have to overinvest in our communication. as principals, people are looking to us for answers. And if we can double down on the ways that we are communicating with people, I think that's really helpful. I think we have to come at our communication with optimism, but realism, dealing with the reality of what is, but knowing, as Shaun said so well a few minutes ago, and as did Muriel, is that we will get past this, but we're going to deal with the reality of where we are right now, what is within our circle of influence, what we can control. So being that calm force, sometimes I think we can get kind of spun up ourselves. I can be a really energetic and passionate person, as those of you who know me. And I think now more than ever, while that optimism and energy is incredibly important to keep our people focused and optimistic about what we're doing for our students, I think it's important for us to bring a sense of calm, reassurance, and knowledge about what's going on. And I think that's particularly true to focus on as a new principal.
Well, I certainly agree with Candy about staying calm. And yesterday was a prime example. My computer, with everything I have on it, crashed. I would say prior COVID, there's no telling what I would have looked like. Yesterday I said, well, it is what it is. So I do think, because there's so many more important things, I can get that stuff back or I can recreate it. I don't know. But it is so important that we stay calm. And I could not agree with you more. I came across a quote from Simon Sinek, and I thought this sort of sums it up right now for us. And the quote goes something like this. Leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking care of those in your charge. And I think as principals right now, the most important thing we can do and let me just tell you, Danny, congratulations. This is like my 28th year, I think, in administration. I feel like a first-year principal all over again. So we're all experiencing this, but I am like, so in awe of everything that you said. But again, it's just taking care of one another. It is taking care of ourselves. I would like to offer this advice for a first-year principal, is don't try to even attempt to do it all. None of us can do it all. We couldn't do it prior COVID. We sure can't do it now. Mm-hmm. So it's, and I listened to Stephen M.R. Covey's podcast. The weekly podcast on leadership is so amazing. And I have listened to Shaun, and I have listened to Stephen M.R. and other great thought leaders. And Stephen said, nothing goes as fast as the speed of trust. So when we find the people within our organizations that we truly trust, and it should be every one of them until they tell us differently. But I ask our staff, what can be your most distinct contribution to our team right now? I gathered that list and I started divvying out responsibilities. Responsibilities that in the past I've shouldered many of those, but I thought right now the only way we're going to survive and the only way we're going to flourish, I'd rather say flourish than survive, because I look at this as quite an exciting time, honestly, that we trust the people that work with us. Incredible things have happened when I said, I need you to handle class lists this year, and here are the criteria. I need you to help me handle communications with our parents and with our students, and I need you to da-da-da-da-da. The synergy has been magnificent. And our circle of influence is continuing to grow within our own community because of trust. So again, I go back, I can't say this enough, just how immensely grateful I am for everything I have learned. I think the past 20 years of my involvement with Franklin Covey has prepared me for this challenge. And I think many of you probably feel the same way. We're prepared in ways our colleagues are not prepared because of what we have learned. So my advice to new principals: embrace the habits, trust those that work with you, and ask your staff, what is your most distinct contribution? And watch them flourish by just being asked and given an opportunity to lead in ways they haven't before.
Very well said, Muriel. And I have not been a school principal before. And Danny, I hear you're crushing it there. So good job. So who am I to give advice to a new principal? But I will just talk about a new leader in general. We at Franklin Covey, our specialty is to really try to help build and develop leaders. We do a lot of research around leadership, and what we found is that the leader, more than anybody else, establishes the culture of the school or the culture of any organization. And culture is, it's hard to put your fingers around it exactly what it is, but we define it as kind of the quality of the relationships inside of the school, the kind of the spoken and unspoken norms and behaviors, and the collective behavior of most of the people. And we've also found that the catalyst is the top leader and the top leadership team, and they can set the tone for the entire organization. Even a massive organization can be set by 5 or 6 people at the top, and it just cascades down. And so my advice to a new leader in any situation would be to create an intentional culture. What do you want it to be like? And to think that through carefully, and to, with your leadership team, get really clear on, this is the kind of culture we want to have. So intentionally, what do we plan to do to build that culture? Otherwise, it'll just happen. Everybody has a culture, and it's either one that you've intentionally created, or it's one that you just accidentally just happened because you didn't have an intention around it. So I just start with that idea of what kind of culture do I want to create, and to remember that it starts with you. And so modeling how you treat other people, and how you respond to tough situations and so forth. Everyone's watching all the time, and so just being a good model is so important. What we've learned with Leader in Me is that it works well because of the very fact that it starts with the adults in the school. And you can't say to the students, hey, be leaders, and not do it yourself. Leader in Me works in schools because it starts with the adults in school saying, we've got to model how we want the children to treat each other. And so we need to think win-win and seek first to understand and have clear goals and objectives, and create the quality of relationships that we want among ourselves, that we expect to have, the kids to have as well. So create an intentional culture.
Thanks, y'all. You all have mentioned in your responses, especially to new leaders, that relationships are key. So we know that a lot of our schools across the country are facing a new reality. It's one that we were exposed to a little bit in the spring. And so now people are going back to school virtually, right? So there is potential that we will be doing remote learning, at least for the first 6, 9, 8 weeks semester. And so the question is, how do you suggest that we build relationships with our students and implement leadership training virtually?
I will tell you that it's important and critical for school systems to revisit their old structures and build upon them. Let me explain that. When the University of Rochester assumed responsibility for East High School in Rochester, New York, East was the lowest performing school in the lowest performing district in New York State, where our graduation rates were trending towards 19%. And 5 years later, I'm happy to say that our graduation rate is at 77%. And in that first year, we realized that our community was hurting. And we spent with the Leader in Me principles, and as well as restorative justice protocols, we had to lean into our students to better understand who they were as learners and what their parents demanded. And again, I said earlier, nothing for us without us. We had to really honor and contextualize our efforts in the spirit of those that we were trying to serve. And so over the last 5 years, we have built incredible relationships with those school communities. So COVID is an extension of things that we've already done. And so I'm not in a place where I want to recreate new patterns or recreate new experiences. I want to strengthen what has happened and lean into those. If we're really talking to students about being advocates for themselves and others, or to be tenacious, or to think purposefully, our 3 school mission, then how does that look in COVID? So challenging them to think about tenacity during COVID, to think about being purposeful in their actions during COVID, in their mental health, their physical health, and their academic progress. And what does advocacy really look like? How are they supporting themselves and their peers? So I would encourage schools to not panic. I think someone said to be calm in the face of the storm, and just to anchor into the things that matter most to you, and that has mattered most when you were building your school culture and climate, and adopting programs and philosophies like Leader in Me or other local contexts that really help people come together around a common set of principles and goals is what's needed. Because when we return to school, we're going to have the exact same transitional problems. What do you transition back into? And so now is an opportunity to strengthen those principles and ideas to prepare not just for COVID, but for life after COVID. And again, I know for us, if it were not for Leader in Me, we would not be where we were in developing a culture where we could more than triple our graduation rate, and we could reduce our out-of-school suspensions by 85% in 5 years. That took an enormous amount of effort and focus on culture building. And I think folks around the country who are doing the same thing, and honoring our children and their families for who they are and making decisions based on their context.
Yeah, I would totally agree in what Shaun just mentioned, and just continue to say, protect your culture, grow your culture, and transform your culture to meet the needs of our families in our current state right now. And so just examining the first 8 days has been an initial sort of work, a bucket of work that we've been doing here at the school level. And actually inviting other Lighthouse teams this morning, in-house, socially distant, being responsible to reflect on how we launched the first 8 days last year, and how we were very intentional in setting a lot of time to plan the first 8 days as a team. And so building on that, building on our culture and growing that virtually. So essentially what we did last year is going to continue this year with the amount of time focused on building our culture via the first 8 days. What will change is the transformation of just going online and adding a couple links in the same platforms that we've been growing into over the spring, but really keeping the foundation and the intentions of what we set out to do and continue to grow that. And what that was relationship building and growing our social emotional community. We cannot be a online community if first we don't build our community. And so just thinking back to the first 8 days, what we're really going to be intentional about is really mimicking what we want our classrooms to look like in our first couple days of professional development before our students return. And so setting up classroom-like scenarios where we will go through the building of a classroom or a staff mission statement, going into breakout sessions where we are going to be product-based driven within a certain time limit. And so if we're going out into a breakout session, we will have this amount of time to really have some key points identified in our mission statement. And then once we return, as our staff development continues, really sharing our knowledge. In other words, mimicking what we want to see and being explicit in the type of interactions that we want to see take place at the classroom level. In general, doing the most basic things that we've always harnessed the best to our abilities.
Danny, A couple of our viewers might know about the first 8 days, and a couple might not because they might not be part of the Leader in Me family. So will you or Muriel expand a little bit more about what is the first 8 days?
Well, I'm happy to join Danny in this level of enthusiasm for the first 8 days. And I'd like to say that we've spent time this summer calling principals from all over the country to get their feedback on what they are going to need as we start to launch this new school year. So very soon there will be an unveiling of some changes to the first 8 days, still keeping the integrity of the importance of setting those expectations each day, doing deep dives into each of the habits, and that has not changed. But there's been a greater emphasis as a result of the feedback that we have received from Leader in Me principals that said, you know, help us. We know that our children are going to come back and they're going to want to talk and they're going to want to share their experiences. And there's no learning that will be able to take place until we address these social emotional needs of our children. So teachers have created a platform for morning meetings that I think everyone's going to be extremely excited about. That was one of the needs that principals said, you know, help us create this platform during the first 8 days where children can address the things that they have been exposed to since March the 13th. And our precious children have seen a whole lot and they have a lot of questions. And we need to allow the time to do that. We have upgraded the literature, the book list, to include titles that are very relevant to what is going on into our world right now, so that that piece of amazing children's literature can be the springboard for these discussions that we know that our children need to have. So the first 8 days, I keep saying how grateful I am to be part of the Leader in Me network, because it does have everything we need. It has everything. So when we talk about resiliency and we talk about trauma, Franklin Covey has already addressed that for us. And we have that as a resource. And our coaches are poised to go in and deliver these things for our schools. So I spent 3 hours yesterday, and I have to giggle when I say this, in a webinar about all these social emotional learning resources. And I thought, you all don't have anything like I've got. And I want to tell you about what I've got, because we already have the first 8 days planned. And it's because we have this framework, this amazing gift. I'm going to just say this one thing about relationships. One of the biggest things that I worried about when our children left us is, how are they going to know and feel that we love them remotely when we can't hug them, when we can't be physically right there beside them when we need them. Then I was in an IEP meeting when I watched a teacher so beautifully deliver information about a child's needs. And I watched the parent just melt as this teacher conveyed this love for this parent's child. And I thought, it can be done. Because if it's in here, it's going to come across no matter where the child is in front of us or whether there's a screen between us. So I say the first day we start back, we find that way to set those expectations high, that we talk about that X to Y by when. We don't have an X right now because we don't really know where they were performing, honestly, at the end of the school year, but we do know where we need to take them. And that is every child at or above grade level by June 2021. And the way we're going to get there is by following the 4 disciplines of execution. setting those expectations for us, August the 17th. So again, first 8 days, loving those children, falling back, looking at everything that we have to offer us right now, from the first 8 days to the 7 habits, to the 4 disciplines of execution, to resiliency, to trauma, you name it. We are so fortunate that we have that, and that we have coaches that will be there to support us to deliver it. So thank you.
Thank you, Muriel. Dr. Nelms, Shaun, I think this question might be best suited for you. You speak often about this topic. Everyone else is also invited to chime in after we speak to Shaun. So equity is a topic of conversation across a lot of different areas, whether it's equity with respect to digital inclusion, equity of access for students with disabilities, racial equity, gender equity, and so on. And so we know that the differential impacts of the pandemic and the protests that have really brought a lot of things, not necessarily to light, but definitely more out in the open than they have been before. So what are some things that administrators, teachers, and families should be thinking about?
You know, I honestly, I've been asked this question many different times in many different contexts. And the answer often changes because daily we learn new things about the realities of these inequities. And we learn them daily because we have the authentic voices of our community represented. So the first thing I would say is to ask questions, to seek understanding, and not to be understood, and to really be open to the responses that you get. An example of this would be our second year at East. I had a Spanish dominant parent contact me, and she was complaining that for years she had asked for a dedicated phone line be provided for parents who spoke Spanish, because they would call the school and the English, would throw them off. They would get rerouted to an office and no one could understand them, so they would hang up. At the same time, the school district was saying, we are a family first community and we want parent engagement. But that's like being invited to a wedding, knowing that they don't want you to attend, they just want you to send a gift, right? So it took us literally 5 minutes to dedicate a line to one of the 4 offices that had a Spanish dominant clerical staff member present. And that in itself created an opportunity for equity that a parent had been pleading for prior to the university's involvement. That's a very simple thing, simple fix for the school system, but it's a major hindrance for parents and for community members that are trying to engage in school settings and are not being listened to. So when you create authentic opportunities for parent voice and for community voice and for student voice, and you practice active listening, they will reveal many of the inequities that impede them from being active in their school communities. So I would say, when we talk about inequities, that definition can't be defined by those sitting in what are perceived as the power seats. The real power lies within the communities that we serve. And we have to flip that paradigm and put the power where it rightfully belongs, and then listen and be responsive and react to what we're being told. And I think then and only then can we address inequities. We have tried to do things for our communities for years, and we have been unable to meet the desired needs of our community. I think now allows us to just sit back and to be reflective, to understand and embrace our incompetence, I'll say that again, so that we can be on the same playing field with one another, to kind of create this interpersonal accountability, and then and only then can we improve our systems and structures. And I'm committed to that as a superintendent. I've been committed to that as a parent and as an educator. We have to make sure that our policies and our practices and beliefs are aligned, and at that intersection is where the real work of equity begins and ends.
Shaun, I couldn't agree with you more. Those are some of the same practices as far as just the outreach and the listening that we are working to do in our community as well. One thing that I would add here to not be redundant is the other thing that I think is so important is to seek out how children feel about their experience and how they learn and what will work for them. Those are practices, as you said before, that we need to lean into those same practices that when our children were here face to face, and I think even more so now, that our teachers know every child by their name, by their strength, and by their need. And that is something that takes active, intentional work on the part of a teacher to really actually dig deep for how children learn, what they're interested in, giving them a voice in the things that they want to learn about, and the best ways for them to make progress. We have to ask them, and we have to then be prepared to offer a whole variety of ways for children to feel that we're really listening, and that they then have the chance to become more engaged. When we actually seek out knowing what their strengths are, what they want to learn about, and then giving them choices in how they do that it is not all teacher directed all the time, that we create a space for children to have a voice in their learning, because they all do it so differently. I think that's another important piece. And I think that doesn't mean that those are just high school kids that we ask. We work hard to do that for children as young as kindergarten. How do you learn? What do you want to learn about? How does it relate to the world? What problem do you want to solve? That level of really listening to the voices of children and helping them find their own voice in that way, and then creating the space for them to be able to contribute, find purpose, and have meaning. I think this is more important than ever. And from an equity perspective, I really think that if you think about school, school is a very controlled environment in most places, right? We have a bell schedule. We tell you when you can go to lunch, when you can go to the bathroom. You're going to read this thing and do that thing. You know, children are at home. Young people are at home now. That structure, unless there's some reason to want to really get back at this with the teacher, that we've lost a lot of kids because they're not in the controlled environment anymore. They get to control what's going on in the environment where they are. We have to create a space that is giving children meaning and purpose. Why is this important? How can we tap into what you really care about? How can you contribute? Those are the ways, and those are the things that teachers have to be intentionally doing if we're going to reach every child and bring every one of them in as being, owning their own learning and the ways they want to contribute to the world. And it is exactly what you said, Shaun. We have to listen. We have to listen to what our kids are telling us about how they can be more engaged in school, not just us telling them what to do.
So team, I am taking notes over here from this wonderful panel. So I know I'm going to know my community's main strength and their need, Candace. So thank you for that. And just building on Shaun, on listen to be open to change and creating authentic learning experiences. I do want to also bring in some things that Muriel mentioned as well. Creating these spaces, as Candace mentioned, for our students, for our parents, for our staff, for our support staff members as well, because they bring a great deal of lived experiences that contribute to our overall community. They are from the community most of the time, and they interact with parents on another personal level that other staff members often do not have experience in. And so in order to create these listening spaces, going back to this distributive leadership model, with our students, we had a student voice committee led by certain Lighthouse members, really opening it up to after school time to take in, really the voice and opinions and concerns of our students. I led a lot of the parent efforts because being the face of the school, that's important to be out in front. With our support staff members, where we really seen a lot of leveraged leadership through that experience, that was the work of our assistant principal and administration team alike, who really harnessed our extra support personnel's strengths to really support and be able to listen to our parents. And so just really piggybacking on these initial thoughts on how to go about building equity is the distributive leadership model, because we cannot be in all places and spaces at one time. And I will end with this, as Candace mentions as well, dealing with a lot of concerns and high energy and emotions. We have to lead with our core values. And in that, really, really calling out people's entitlement, as well as others who fall in the victimization role as well. And through listening and gathering these experiences and harnessing that energy that we all possess towards our core values, we have to have courageous conversations during this time in order to build on equity for everyone.
Thank you all so much. We want to honor your time, and we definitely could continue talking all day. I could clear my whole schedule to stay with you for all the wisdom that you've shared. We do want to connect to wisdom. So as Danny was just saying, he's taking notes, I'm taking notes. The people that are watching this are taking notes. So we want to pose one final question for you in closing. What is your one piece of advice, encouragement, final thought as we all prepare for this new school year?
I'll share one quick personal story that will then hopefully align to just what I would just ask or just encourage everyone to do. I was on a call with my management team 3 days ago where I began talking about something that's happening here in our community that I literally just broke down and just began crying. And it was just this really vulnerable moment that was incredibly intense for me. And you pull it back together and I think everyone, you get a little stunned. And in that, I think people look to us for, strength, right? And guidance. And I think our vulnerability in the way that we lead and how we can share that at times with people is really important, because it allows them to be vulnerable also. But it also reminded me that I had a board meeting that night. I got home very late, and it was such a reminder to me that I'm not managing my energy well. And I share that with anyone who's listening to this, because I want to just encourage people to really build in recovery time and to really do the things that are necessary to take care of yourself. And some of this is really mostly, it's really about self-regulation and being very proactive about those things in your life. Like the best athletes build in time to recover. So I just would encourage people to really reflect and think carefully about how you're self-regulating, whether it's your sleep, your exercise, the things you're eating. And I know we all talk about this balance thing, but it's incredibly important for leaders right now, for teachers right now, where we can, that we're paying very close attention to our self-care, and that we build in little small practices, stopping and, if you have 2 minutes to close your door, to take a short amount of time every day to focus on gratitude, the things that we're so grateful for, little times to just reflect and just catch your breath. I think that there's a lot of talk about these things in our leadership world, but I think we have to be intentional about our self-care. This is going to be a long school year. And I think we need to just be compassionate with ourselves, turning down that voice in our head of criticism and perfectionism. And when we do that for ourselves, we model it for others that they should be doing it for themselves. And the more compassionate we are with ourselves, the more compassionate we can be with others. So that's what I would ask. I would just encourage everyone to do this year.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a great discussion. And as I said earlier, we have to take the opportunities that COVID has presented. And for me, it's been an opportunity to be introspective and trying to determine where that end goal is, or that desired space. And I find myself reading James Baldwin probably daily. And there's one of his quotes that I want to read. It says, "It is certain in any case that ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." Again, ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. I believe that school systems must use this time to really think about how to no longer become complicit in our systemic design, which forces inequities, and to do what Bettina Love often says, and that's to become co-conspirators against injustice. And I'm willing to take that journey with my colleagues and friends throughout the country to really address the systemic issues that cause many of our children and families to go without, while also structurally promoting the success for other groups of individuals. And I believe that collectively we can do this. I am encouraged by the national cry for equity. I am encouraged that we're finally having a common definition of what equity means. And we're no longer seeing racism as a violent physical act in isolation, but really thinking about it from a systemic lens and understanding that we all play a role in it, and we play a bigger part in it if we don't do something to combat it. So in the words of James Baldwin, I'm going to no longer let that injustice continue. Thank you.
And Shaun, congratulations on what you've done with East High School. It really is incredible. I've heard so many stories from some of our coaches there, and it's really remarkable what we've done. So way to go.
Thanks.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I would say thinking with the end in mind has been something you often hear in our school for a long time. And I would say focus on your circle of control to then in part grow your circle of influence has been something that I have harnessed and really spread throughout, and it really emanates throughout our building. And so with that, I would culminate that to do simple better. As we touched upon, we have a golden opportunity in front of us to really impact our community and think about the legacy that we're going to leave with our current community. And so I and my staff alike in our community have really focused and harnessed our circle of control to do simple better. Be cordial, build relationships, listen. When we are in our sessions, be intentional. And so from our security guard and our lunchroom attendants who have been serving food throughout this closure, to our teacher staff and our administration team alike, we have really focused on really providing the core services and building relationships and really living out our humanity towards one another on a day-to-day basis. And guess what? It's brought us together. As crazy as this time has been, as conflict-driven as Chicago is, we have found this pocket within our community and hope to grow our influence by focusing on our circle of control and by doing simple better.
All this wisdom. I've been taking copious notes, so I want to thank everyone on the panel for expanding my learning over the past hour. We've all heard that it's quite singular that this has all happened in the year of 2020, which means when we go to the ophthalmologist, do we have perfect vision or not? A year where I'm often asked, aren't you just longing for normal again? And I'm really not. You know, I look at this as an incredible opportunity for the first time in my lifetime that schools can truly look different, that learning anywhere at any time, going back to Candy's remarks about knowing our children so well, that we are designing instruction to meet their needs, not to meet the needs of some tests that they take once a year, and to really start to explore this new and innovative way in which we can teach. We all know that disruption results in innovation. And when I think of how far our staff has come in technology alone since March, it would have taken our any staff um, 5 years to learn what they had to learn in less than 3 to 4 months. So again, not wanting to go back necessarily to the way things were, but to embrace this incredible opportunity we have been given to bring about change and shift our paradigms, to what schools should look like now, and also to get it right. We have a chance to really get things right. And I hope that we'll come together collectively as a world and look at how we can make this world better, more loving, more kind. Our theme for this year is growing leaders through love, peace, acceptance, and understanding. And so what we do for children this year will be couched around those things. But the year of 2020, perfect vision, giving us an opportunity to see what can be, and then having the courage to go forth and make it happen.
Well, it's been an honor to be with everyone, and I'm so proud to be on the same stage with Shaun Nelms, who's done such a great job, as I just mentioned, with East High School, going from 25 to 75%, 77% graduation. Unbelievable. Candace, I know what you've done at Fallbrook with your whole district, the remarkable outcomes you're getting, and the culture you've created there is remarkable. Danny, I've been to your school and so proud of you, and you being a first-year principal and the great work you're doing and carrying on there. If I had a kid and lived in Chicago area, I'd send him to your school for sure. And Muriel, the work that you've done. And when I first saw your school like 12 years ago, and I was blown away, and I told my wife we wanted to move to Raleigh because I wanted my kids to go to A.B. Combs, and the feeling in the school. And the feeling I got from visiting your school was I told my wife this, I said, it's as if every adult in the school believes that every child is a genius. That's what I felt in your school. And to think that your model is now in 5,000 schools in 50 countries is pretty remarkable. So it's a real honor to seriously be with all of you. To wrap it up, I just have 2 ideas. One is a practical one. I remember in business school learning from Professor John Cotter, and he studied leadership more than anyone in the world. And he concluded this: leaders under-communicate their vision and strategy by not a matter of 1 or 2 times, but by 10-fold. And he talked about how, as a leader, don't assume people know what's in your head. Don't assume they know your strategy and your ideas and your intent. You have to communicate it again and again and again, and many more fold than you think you do, by a factor of 10, he concluded. So that's just kind of a practical tip to think about as you are. Communication is so important right now. I'm on the receiving end. I've got a new daughter, Allie, going into high school, and a son going into middle school next year. And there's kind of fear and anxiety in the air, and no one's sure what's going on. And best thing that's happening is these 2 schools that my kids are going to are communicating really well, constantly, like almost daily. And it's needed, because sometimes I'm too busy and I skip that email and I get it 2 days later, kind of the same thing. You don't worry about repeating yourself too much. You'll never get criticized for over communicating, but you will for under communicating. So that's just a practical idea. The big idea, the foundational idea, would just be the idea of, in the end, it's all about the individual. And I'm coaching a Little League football team right now. I've got 20 boys. They all come from different backgrounds. And I watch the parents hover around, and all they want is their kid to succeed. They don't care if you win or lose so much. They just want their kid to have a good time. And they're so worried about the coaches and how they're going to treat their kids. And I look at this little kid on my team named Tyler. Hasn't played before. He's smaller than everybody. He's not the most coordinated. And all I can think about is his mom and dad care so much about him having a good experience. And I'm thinking back to my my father's definition of leadership, where he said, leadership is communicating to another person their worth and potential so clearly they're inspired to see it in themselves. And my job as a coach is to communicate to Tyler that I love you, you matter, you belong on this team, you're great, we're gonna find your skills and talents, we're gonna use you, and that's what success looks like. And when I was a younger coach, I've coached for a long time, I used to care a lot about winning. And it's faded over time, to be honest. I still care, I wanna be competitive, but now I'm kind of like, if I win half my games, I'm happy. Job one is I want these 20 boys to just look back and say, that was an amazing year. And I felt so valued. So that's what I'm trying to do as a coach. But I just think in the end, we talk about all the structures and systems and everything that we're trying to get in place. In the end, it's all about that kid, that student with that teacher and the 2 or 3 other key adults in the school they have contact with and how they are made to feel. That ultimately what this is all about. So let's not forget that in our efforts to recreate and design our systems and structures. It's all about leadership. I feel valued, affirmed, loved, and that's what I've learned from all of you. Seriously, that's why you're great leaders and principals, because in the end, you're all about the students. You really are, and I've been to your places and felt it, and it's everything. So thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today and for your time and your wisdom that you've imparted on us.